Hey all, this is Erdtree, and this is my mostly negative review for Shadow of the Erdtree. And it's mostly negative not because I have mostly negative things to say about Shadow of the Erdtree, it's mostly negative because I mostly want to talk about negative things. The virtues enjoyed by Shadow of the Erdtree are easy to understand and easy to find, and I'm sure there will be a lot of people talking about them for a long time, myself included. The purpose of this video, though, is to talk about the negatives and talk about what I think they did poorly and might improve. My overall impression for those interested in it is that this is a fantastic DLC. 9.9 out of 10. I think it's possible that this is the best DLC ever made by human hands. In fact, in terms of size, scale, and quality, it's hard to even call it a DLC. It strays far from what that title typically implies, having more in common with sequels than normal DLCs. Shadow of the Erdtree left me completely satisfied, and any criticism I might levy in this video should be viewed with the understanding that I believe this expansion should qualify for Game of the Year, and in fact should probably win. Alright, the first thing I want to talk about is the Scadutree blessing system. The Scadutree blessings are a new leveling system introduced for Shadow of the Erdtree that only works in the Shadow of the Erdtree area. The system is simple. As you upgrade it, enemies will deal less damage and you will deal more damage to them. And the amount that the Scadutree blessing gives you is huge, much more than you could get through traditional leveling and other ways of increasing your damage or mitigating the damage taken. Overall, I think this is a fantastic system and I'm glad that they implemented it, but I have a couple of criticisms on how it was done. For context though, let's talk about why I think it's a good idea in general. I've had a problem with From Software DLCs for a long time, and it was specifically that there was no sense of progression. The DLCs were harder than the base game and they were tailored for endgame level characters. And they made no attempt to replicate the feeling of getting stronger that you felt in the base game. And I've always thought that was a mistake. The feeling of progression is one of the reasons why Souls games are so fun. It's not the only reason that they're fun, it's also fun to actually just be strong, to get to the point where you're strong and then be happy with it. But in my opinion, it's better to have both. And previous DLCs didn't have both. Your weapon is as upgraded as it's gonna get. You can still level up, but the damage and the health that you get hits soft caps, and so their effect is minimal. And I felt this was going to be a particularly significant problem for Elden Ring, because very early on in Elden Ring they pushed the idea that you didn't have to fight everything that you saw. You could go off, gain levels, gain upgrades, and come back when you were stronger. And without an alternate upgrade system, it would be hard for the DLC to replicate that experience. And so I was very happy with the interview where Miyazaki announced the Scadutree blessings, because he cited my concerns specifically as the reason for its implementation. He views the ability of getting stuck on a boss and being able to go elsewhere to get stronger as a good thing, as something that needs to be able to be experienced by people that are already at endgame, that are at level 400, it doesn't matter. He wants you to have the ability to feel that feeling. He sees it as giving something to people, something valuable, when he takes away their level 400 overpowered character's ability to steamroll through the DLC. Now, for me, I was very satisfied with how the system worked, but I have two criticisms for it. First of all, there's not enough Scadutree blessings littered around. It takes 50 Scadutree blessings to upgrade your thing to the max, and there are only 50 in the DLC. I don't think it should work this way. I think it should work how the golden seeds do in the base game. In the base game, you only need 30 golden seeds to upgrade your flask all the way. But in total, the game has 41, so if you miss some, you still can get to the max upgrade level. I believe it was a mistake to not have at least 20 more. There have been a lot of complaints regarding the game's difficulty, and some of those might have been mitigated had the Scadutree fragments been more plentiful. And I think to some degree From Software understands this, because they released a patch that increased the effectiveness of Scadutree blessings. It was an across-the-board buff with the biggest increases happening at the lower levels. And my problem with it is that it's a less elegant solution than just adding more Scadutree fragments, and ultimately achieves the same result. It's the same thing. So let's say that you're post-patch, and you're at Scadutree Blessing 5. Well, that gives you about a 35% damage increase. And it takes about 11 Scadutree fragments to get there. Well, before the patch, you would have had to have been at Scadutree Fragment 7 to have that same damage buff, which means you would have needed 15 fragments. It would have been a more elegant solution had they initially, before the game came out, thought to simply make the fragments more plentiful. One of the criticisms I've heard from other people about Elden Ring is that they didn't feel sufficiently rewarded for things. That's almost certainly not the case with Scadutree fragments though, so having an extra 20 lying around in different places of importance would have surely lessened those people's complaints. They would have rather found another fragment than, say, a cookbook. Although I don't agree with them, I actually like the cookbooks quite a bit. Now, the second issue I have with the fragments is more philosophical. The fragments are a reward for carefully exploring, and their intended purpose is to give the player a way to upgrade themselves by going off and doing something else. It's supposed to simulate what you could do in the base game. But they don't actually simulate what you could do in the base game because they work very differently. In the base game, what you would do to get stronger is go off, get souls, find upgrade materials, and increase your strength that way. But that happens no matter what you do. It's not something you can miss. You can't fail to find a Somber Smithing Stone 8 and then have that mean that you never get to the maximum upgrade level of your weapon. And you get souls and upgrade materials no matter what it is that you're doing. You could be tackling legacy dungeons, you could be doing the mini dungeons or the caves. Regardless of what you do, you're going to find upgrade materials and souls, which are the primary method of getting stronger. You can't fail at trying to get stronger in the base game, but you can fail at trying to get stronger in the DLC. And even if you don't miss them, even if you find all of them or most of them, the Scadutree fragments force you to engage with the exploration in a weird and unnatural way. You're encouraged to scrounge around and really comb an area. And that's not good. Remember, the purpose of the Scadutree fragments is to give you a way to get stronger, to face a boss if you get stuck with it. You get stuck at a boss, you go elsewhere, you find fragments, you can go back and tackle that boss. But since many of them are obscure, missable, and limited in nature, you are compelled to comb an area in a way that you might not otherwise have done. And not everybody likes to do that. I do that anyway, but not everybody wants to do that. And it by default will make the exploration aspect of the DLC less enjoyable than it was in the base game, because the connection between upgrade and exploration was looser. Now, the thing is, I support the Scadutree fragment upgrade system. I support the reason why they were implemented, and I think it was actually pretty good. It's better to have had them than not to have had them. All future DLCs that From Software makes, I believe, should have a progression system attached to them. Something that will try and simulate the experience of having gone through the game your first time through. But I wouldn't want that system to be exactly like the Scadutree blessings. There's room for improvement. Either by making the fragments far more plentiful, or scrapping the system entirely and thinking up a more elegant solution. Alright, let's talk about my second criticism, the big criticism, the last boss. If you didn't see a spoiler warning up until this point, now's your chance to leave. This is not a spoiler-free video. The last boss is Radahn, and a lot of people are unhappy with Radahn being the final boss. There's people that are unhappy with him mechanically, as a boss. There's people that think that the fight is too much, it's too difficult, disorienting. But apart from those, there are people unhappy with the story ending with Radahn as the final boss. There are people that will go so far as to speculate that the initial story planned Godwyn to be Miquella's consort, and it was changed to Radahn for some reason. The basis of the speculation is that there are numerous item descriptions tying Godwyn to Miquella. The Golden Epitaph sword has Miquella referring to Godwyn as Lord Brother, and Lord Brother is how he refers to Radahn in the memory cutscene at the end. The sword also has Miquella wishing that Godwyn would die a true death, which could be similar to how he needed Radahn to die so he could bring his soul back in Mohg's body. There's also that Mohg calls his coming dynasty the Mohgwyn dynasty, which has the words Mohg and Gwyn in it. Now, before I get to my criticism, I want to make sure that it's understood that these two are not the criticisms that I hold. I don't think the fight is too hard or unfair, and I don't think having Radahn at the end is a retcon, or that Radahn took the place that Godwyn was supposed to be in. I think it's possible that if we look at previous lore points and the new stuff introduced in Shadow of the Erdtree, the connection between Radahn and Miquella might make more sense. But there is still a problem, and I think it's the real reason why people are dissatisfied with the ending. And it's that having Radahn as the final boss is more confusing than it is satisfying. So, for example, let's assume that I'm right, and that after some time has passed and we look into the lore and speculation becomes more refined, we discover that the connection between Radahn and Miquella makes perfect sense. Let's assume the best case scenario. And if we dig deep into the lore, we find that it's actually completely satisfying after the fact. Well, in that case, that still doesn't really help us during the fight. It doesn't help us in the short term. It doesn't matter that it was hinted at for a tiny amount of time in the DLC. It doesn't help the situation that Ansbach and Freya's questline lets you know about it beforehand. None of those factors make it seem less stupid when you first hear about it. Confusion and displeasure is not what the revelation of the final boss should be inspiring in people during the boss fight. Let me give you an example. In Dark Souls 3, Soul of Cinder. Soul of Cinder had presentation. And you don't have to be very well versed in the lore. You don't have to go around reading every single item description to understand what Soul of Cinder represents. As you fight him, he switches forms, changing his playstyle, and in many ways moving very much like a player. And as the fight goes on, you realize what he's supposed to be. You realize what he represents. He's you. He's a representation of all the people who chose to link the fire. And then when you get him into the final phase, his fighting style changes once more to resemble Gwyn's, the First Lord of Cinder. It's an impactful moment, and it's something you can easily understand even if you don't understand the story, even if you're only partially paying attention to what's happening in the item descriptions and the lore. From Software is very good at this. They've done it well with many different bosses throughout the years. But Radahn is an unfortunate exception. The reaction I am seeing from people when they see Radahn is confusion and displeasure. And almost all the relevant lore details that would ease the shock aren't accessible until after the boss fight. The Remembrance tells us the reason why Miquella wanted Radahn as a consort. And the armor item description reveals to us finally what Malenia said to Radahn during their battle in Caelid, and it helps explain what Malenia was doing in Caelid warring with Radahn in the first place, which was a big mystery in the base game. But again, this is all stuff that you don't get until after you beat the boss fight. It's information that will do nothing for you when Radahn is first revealed, or when you are fighting him. And given how difficult he is, that could be quite a while. I think they did a bad job with how Radahn was introduced in the DLC. You can tell by how many people are complaining about it, but not just anybody. Even people like me. I'm the biggest Radahn supporter. No one has levied more Malenia slander on this earth than I. So if even I am unhappy with Radahn's presentation, then I think it's obvious that there's a problem. Alright, that's the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching.